We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced.
Cuban Missile Crisis, a debatable diplomatic process that saved Cuba.
October 16, 1962, marked the day that started a 13-day political and military standoff between leaders of the U.S. and the Soviet Union over the installation of nuclear-armed Soviet missiles on Cuba, just 90 miles away from U.S. shores.
Two of the largest countries, America, Russia, plus Cuba, go head-to-head during the Cold War to avoid another war. The three main people involved were John F. Kennedy, Nikita Khrushchev, and Fidel Castro. America has desperately tried to convince Russia to remove missiles in Cuba. After many days of non-stop diplomacy and debating, the three countries eventually came to a compromise.
The conflict first occurred when the Soviets secretly installed missiles in Cuba to invade and attack U.S. cities.
On October 14th, a U.S. biplane was flown by pilot Richard Heiser, takes dozens of photos of newly built installations in Cuba. In a later interview, he says he fears he will be known as the man who started the war.
On October 15, CIA analysts started to notice launchers, missiles, and transport trucks, indicating that Soviets might be building sites to launch missiles nearly across the United States.
President John F. Kennedy told Americans about the missiles and explained he would enact a naval blockade around Cuba.
During Day 3 and the ongoing next 5 days, Kennedy meets with a team of advisors to discuss the missile threats. He was later given 3 options: diplomacy with Fidel Castro and Nikita Khrushchev, a naval quarantine of Cuba, or an air attack to eliminate the missile sites, which could cost thousands of Soviets and cause counterattack on a target like Berlin.
October 22nd, JFK goes on national television to give a speech, which shocks Americans due to him revealing the unmistakable evidence of the missiles. JFK also announces that he will try to prevent ships from carrying weapons into Cuba, and also demands the Soviets to withdraw their missiles. Meanwhile, a U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, Floyd Kohler, delivers a letter from Kennedy to Khrushchev. Kennedy writes, "The one thing that has most concerned me has been the possibility that your government would not correctly understand the will and determination of the United States in any given situation. Since I have not assumed that you or any other sane man would, in this nuclear age, liberally plunge the world into war, which it is crystal clear no country could win, and which would only result in a catastrophic consequence to the whole world, including the aggressor."
October 23rd, Khrushchev writes back to JFK revising his demand that the Soviets remove the missiles, which the Soviet leader insists are intended solely for defensive purposes. Kennedy writes back aggressively reminding Khrushchev that he began the debate by secretly sending missiles to Cuba. However, his aggression did have consequences. U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson explains the matter to the UN Security Council. While U.S. ships move into position in the waters around Cuba, Soviet submarines threateningly move into the Caribbean, posed as if they are trying to break a blockage. But Soviet fighters carrying military supplies headed for Cuba stopped in their tracks.
On the 24th, Khrushchev sends a resentful letter to Kennedy, accusing him of threatening the Soviet Union. "You are no longer appealing to reason, but wish to intimidate us."
October 25th, the Soviet arms fighters turn back to Europe, but the oil tanker Bucharest approaches the U.S. quarantine zone, directly headed for Cuba. 2 American warships, the USS Excess and the USS Gearing, prepared to stop it, which could have led to war. Instead, Kennedy decided to let Bucharest through the quarantine because it wasn't carrying anything illegal.
October 26th, Fidel Castro sent a letter to Nikita, urging him to launch a nuclear strike against the U.S., which the premier ignores and instead sends a letter to JFK about how he would like to work with the president to resolve this conflict and ensure they don't, quote, doom the world to a catastrophe of a thermonuclear war.
According to Kaylee Stallard, a journalist at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., this letter was a significant moment in the crisis and involved political risk on both sides for Khrushchev to make this emotional appeal to the U.S. president, risking the appearance of weakness, and for Kennedy to accept the Soviet premier's sentiment as genuine, risking the appearance of naivety.
October 27, U.S. U-2 pilot Rudolph Anderson is shot down and killed flying over Cuba. War seems impending. Assistant Secretary of Defense Paul Knight says they fired the first shot, and President John F. Kennedy announces, "We are now in an entirely new ballgame." However, JFK quickly concludes that Khrushchev had not given the order to shoot down Anderson's plane. The incident caused both leaders to realize that the situation is getting dangerously out of hand. On the same day, Khrushchev sends another letter to Kennedy in which he demands that the United States withdraw missiles from Turkey as part of the deal. JFK responds by offering to promise not to attack Cuba after the Russians withdraw.
That very evening, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, meets with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin and announces that the United States already planned to remove its missiles from Turkey, but cannot say so to the public. Instead, he sees this as the moment that both nations retreated from the brink of another war.
The 28th, the very last day of an immensely stressful, both diplomatic and debatable procedure, Khrushchev finally concedes, writing an open letter declaring the Soviet missiles will be dismantled and removed from Cuba. The Kennedy White House portrayed the withdrawal as a result of the president's tough stance in the face of Soviet aggression.
In reality, Peter Kornbluh, an author of the Cuba documentary, writes, "The resolution of the crisis owed to the president's commitment to negotiate and find common ground in a dangerous nuclear war."
Both John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had to come to a compromise with perseverance through debating and diplomacy to stop a very possible war. Both leaders had to have immense courage to step up, risk showing weakness and naivety, and face the consequences of their actions to solve this dangerous problem that could have seriously escalated.
The Cuban Missile Crisis is one of the most important events during the Cold War, debatably the hottest point during it, and strengthened Kennedy's image domestically and internationally. Two other important results of the crisis were nuclear weapon buildup after the war ended, Cuba's political isolation that the country faced in years and decades afterward, and Cuba's relations with the Soviet Union reached an all-time low with Khrushchev's reign. It also aided negative world opinions regarding the failed pay-a-bigs invasion.
Although the situation was resolved in an orderly manner, there were many flaws and many moments where the war seemed like the next option. Kennedy did have two other options, both most likely having ended up messily. However, there are many other options to prevent the crisis altogether.
First off, it could have been prevented if Americans hadn't blockaded Cuba to stop the Soviets from threatening their territories. Another simpler option would have been if Fidel Castro didn't let the Soviets place missiles in there in the first place.
A third solution would have been if the US didn't place nukes and/or missiles in Turkey and proceeded to threaten the USSR with them.
All in all, the entire debacle was extremely suspenseful and stressful between two world leaders, but it showed, through debate and diplomacy, any conflict can be resolved without war or having to fight it out. If they weren't mature as they were, the whole ordeal would have escalated to something even bigger.
Even though it could have been resolved much faster, more efficiently, and easier, in the end it worked out for both sides. The event had serious impacts on both countries, and the events still linger on even to this day.